So far, we've seen how presidents get elected. Let's have a look at what presidents can do. The president and the president's powers are defined by the Constitution. So the president has power within the executive branch, his branch. But he also has some powers over the legislative and judicial branch as part of the system of checks and balances. We'll get into that into more details. But the president also has something you're familiar with, a symbolic function. In times of crisis, the president gets to stand for the whole nation. There's an example which you will find on eCampus. This is Barack Obama after the shooting of Trayvon Martin, a young black man in Arizona. Barack Obama went on national television and said, "If I had a son, he would look like Trayvon." So the president, standing in for another black man, standing in for the American nation. George W. Bush, who was considered a weak president before the terrorist attacks on September 2001. George W. Bush was able to become a national unifying figure in a time of crisis. So it's an important function performed by the president. It's a function, it's a form of power, because if the president is popular, he can impose his will, impose his projects on the other two branches. It's a form of popular legitimacy which gives him a mandate to govern. A mandate means a mission to govern. It is seen as having the legitimacy to govern, more so than Congress. Why is that? Well, one of the reasons is that the president is elected by the whole nation. John Boehner, the House Speaker, was elected in a small congressional district. Barack Obama was elected twice by the entire nation. Plus, of course, this symbolic function is reinforced by Hollywood films and TV series in which you will have Harrison Ford in Air Force One saving the country. Think of Independence Day and many other movies in which the president is larger than life, standing for the American people and saving the American people. So that's a role which is not present in the Constitution. This idea of the president representing the entire nation and deriving power and legitimacy from this representation. But the president also has powers defined in the Constitution, some of them as part of the system of checks and balances. The president is the head of the executive, and as such is the head of the entire administration. All the people working in the executive branch more or less have to follow his orders. And thus, the president can give executive orders to the agencies working in the federal government. That seems logical. But because there are thousands, hundreds of thousands actually, of people working directly or indirectly for the federal government, it means that when the president gives an order, it can have the same effect as a law. And we'll see an example of that in a second. The president also has the power of nominating the people who will work for the federal government. So he chooses the cabinet. In other countries, that would be the ministers. He chooses the heads of most agencies. And he is also, in times of war, the commander-in-chief of the nation. This is something which George W. Bush used a lot. This idea that as a commander-in-chief, he had special powers in times of war, that his powers were reinforced by the circumstances. Let's have a look at an example of an executive order, what it means to give an executive order. So it's a First Amendment case which arose during the Bush administration, and I mean the George W. Bush administration. The government had a project. The project was to let religious groups work for government agencies while retaining their religious identity. What it meant was that these religious groups would be able to discriminate when recruiting employees. They would retain the right to choose people according to their religion. So there is a problem with that. The problem is the First Amendment, which says Congress shall make no law regarding an establishment of religion. In other words, Congress cannot favor one religion. Was it a case of discrimination? There was disagreement. Democrats thought that using federal money to create forms of discrimination was unacceptable. Republicans, who are closer to religious groups, were ready to accept the bill. But the disagreement was such that the law did not pass. So George W. Bush tried to accomplish this goal through a law. When that failed, he used an executive order. He ordered the federal agencies to work with the religious groups in the way which would have been authorized by the law. Something which was blocked in Congress, where there was no national consensus, was achieved through an executive order with the exact same effect. George W. Bush was able to get around the stalemate, to achieve the same effect as a law, and in doing so, it demonstrated the problem with the division of power, because if the president can do things which have the same effect as a law, then what is the role of Congress in the division of power? The president also has truly legislative powers, especially the two vetoes. A veto is a means for the president to block a bill, to prevent a bill from becoming a law. And the president has two vetoes. One is defined in the Constitution, one is more technical. It's called the pocket veto. The power of veto, that's something presidents can use if they disagree with a bill. They can refuse to sign a bill into a law. In that case, they send back the bill to Congress, and Congress has to approve the bill again with a 2/3 majority in order to overcome the veto. So the president decides to use his power and to force Congress to demonstrate that there is a consensus. And it's very difficult for a divided Congress to reach a 2/3 majority. So the president can effectively block most bills this way if he disagrees with the proposed bill. Except, of course, Congress is elected, so the president cannot go against the will of Congress without good reasons. So this is defined in the Constitution. The president has a different veto. That veto is called the pocket veto. The pocket veto is technical. The president has 10 days to sign a bill when he receives the bill from Congress. 10 days. After 10 days, the bill automatically becomes a law. So if the president does not use his veto, a bill becomes a law, with or without his signature. But it only becomes a law if Congress is in session at that time. If Congress adjourns and in the 10 days, If the Congress is no longer in session, then the bill simply disappears. So if the President receives a bill and less than 10 days after that, Congress adjourns, takes a break, then the President does not even have to use his veto. He can simply wait and the bill goes away. It's more efficient for the President because he does not have to do anything. He just has to wait. Plus, Congress does not get to vote again. Congress cannot overcome the pocket veto. The bill simply disappears. Constitutional veto, veto power. Technical veto, pocket veto. Two ways for the President to intervene in the legislative process to block bills. The President can also intervene after a bill has been signed with a signing statement. A signing statement is a short declaration made by the President when he signs a bill into a law. So he accepts the bill, but can comment. In this example, an act, a law, would have made it illegal for the President to recruit some advisors. The bill was a way to prevent the President from spending money on advisors. And this is a signing statement. In the signing statement, the administration, the executive branch, said, "We think it violates the separation of powers. Therefore, we will construe this section not to abrogate these presidential prerogatives. Therefore, we think this is unconstitutional and we will not apply the law." So the President can select, to a certain extent, how the law will be applied. And because his role is to lead the executive branch which applies the law, if the President says this is how we are going to do it, it's probably going to happen that way. So signing statements are a powerful way to shape legislation even after signing it. Plus, the President sets the legislative agenda, the political agenda. It means that A, the President can propose bills, and B, the President gets to define what is important. Because the President can go on TV and say we should work on jobs, we should work on climate change, we should work on this, we should work on that. And because the President is so visible, so important, because he is elected by the entire nation, it's very difficult for Congress to ignore the priorities of the government, of the President. So the President defines what is important and what's not. This is an example of Barack Obama telling Congress that they have to pass a job bill, that they have to act on jobs, on joblessness. He cannot force Congress, but because this is an article published in the New York Times and everywhere in the newspapers, it's very difficult for Congress to ignore this plea by Barack Obama. Finally, the President has power over the judicial branch. He nominates federal judges and he can pardon people who have been found guilty in the federal system, and only in the federal system. If you kill someone in Texas, the President cannot pardon you. If you do something in the federal system of justice, then the President can intervene. This is not something which presidents do a lot. They try not to intervene too much, but they can pardon minor offenses. This is something we'll have a look at in more details in the next lecture. Let's sum this up, the system of checks and balances. You're familiar with the blue arrows. the powers which the legislative branch has over the other two branches. What are the powers of the executive branch over the other two branches? Well, A, veto power. The president can veto bills with the pocket veto and the constitutional veto. B, it can introduce legislation and set the political agenda, something which we've just discussed. C, it can pardon people who have been found guilty by the judicial branch. And D, the president can nominate judges in the federal system. In the next and final lecture, we'll have a look at the powers of the judicial branch over the executive and the legislative branch.